Mr. North America for 1977, Mike Mentzer of Washington, D.C. And Mike, I understand you're a medical student. Does this help and assist in the development and the understanding of the muscles?
Well, certainly a bodybuilder has to have a knowledge of all the muscles, but that's not why I chose medicine, no.
Did you get into the body development aspects of it because of medicine or vice versa?
Well, I got into bodybuilding, and that led to, of course, an intense interest in the body, and it developed, of course, into my present status as a student in medicine.
How many hours a day do you have to work to develop a physique like that?
Well, most bodybuilders train at least 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, but I only train a total of 3 hours a week.
Okay, what do you do during those hours?
Train very hard.
The society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. One of the more fascinating archetypes we encounter in life is that of the intellectual warrior, someone who has achieved excellence in their physical and mental development. Think of Miyamoto Musashi, a skilled samurai, poet and artist, Plato, a Greek philosopher and credentialed wrestler, and John Danaher, one of the greatest martial arts coaches with a PhD in philosophy. Mike Mentzer was a world champion bodybuilder and pre-med student. Developing his mind was as crucial to him as developing his physique. He was an objectivist with a keen interest in the philosophy of Ayn Rand. He would speak with an eloquence that would put pretty much every modern intellectual to shame. But more importantly, he was a revolutionary in his field, willing to go to war with $1 billion industry and its poster boy, to stand up for his friends and what he believed to be right. This video will be documenting the life of Mike Mentzer, from his bodybuilding career, his philosophy, feud with Arnold Schwarzenegger, his tragic decline and death, to the enduring legacy he leaves behind in the fitness world today. Mike Mentzer was born in 1951 and raised within a German district in Philadelphia. He had a great relationship with his family, most notably his brother Ray and his father, who would be the spark for not just Mike's interest in bodybuilding, but his outlook on life and values. He attended a grammar school where he'd achieve all straight A's and credit his teacher, Mrs. Schaub, for his love and language. His expert command of the English language would be an essential tool for Mentzer in teaching his bodybuilding philosophy years later.
Brings me to the subject of the purpose of these audio tapes. It is not my intention to merely provide the listener with another bodybuilding program and expect you to then blindly follow it. That would not be worth much long range. Instead, my purpose is to teach you to think logically about training and nutrition so that ultimately you'll be able to think independently about these subjects and thus become your own trainer, your own coach, and never again have to rely on the suspect opinion of others.
Impressively, while going through the rigors of being a professional athlete, Mike would study as a pre-med student, and while not in the gym, he would immerse himself in the studies of organic chemistry, genetics and philosophy. One day while in a drugstore, an 11-year-old Mike Mentzer would glance upon a bodybuilding magazine that featured Bill Pearl, kick-starting his fascination with developing the human body and pushing the limits of muscular development. To quote Mike, "There was an immediate emotional recognition. I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I asked my mother to buy the magazine, then ran home to read every single word. That evening I asked my dad to buy me a set of weights, but he answered, not until Christmas. I didn't have long to wait. And how I remembered that gleeful Christmas morning when I found the weights under the tree. I spent the whole holiday down in the basement lifting weights. I trained by myself for a year, and then my father, impressed by my commitment, contacted an old buddy of his who worked out. His name was John Myers. He was about 40 at the time and had a superbly equipped gym in his garage. John invited me to train with him and his workout partner, Russell Herzog. Russell was in his late 20s and an Olympic lifter, while John was a powerlifter. I worked with them on Olympic and power movements, and they always encouraged me to train heavy. They had a massive influence on my early training. Thereafter, I've always considered myself not just a bodybuilder, but a strength athlete also. My father, although not an intellectual, learned something about the value of knowledge in life, and had sought to instill that value in me. He would reward me whenever I did well in school. On one occasion, he gave me a $20 bill for doing well. Another time, he gave me a baseball mitt. He was keen to encourage my studies and would brag about his smart son to his friends. Mike had all the necessary ingredients to succeed. Excellent genetics for bodybuilding, a high IQ, and mentors in his early life such as his father and teacher who would nurture Mike's interest in language, education, and physical development. John Myers would bring Mike to the first ever Olympia contest in 1965, which was won by Larry Scott. The adulation and respect shown to Scott had a profound impact on the young 14-year-old Mentzer, and upon returning home he would map out his route forward in bodybuilding, with his eyes firmly fixed upon taking home the Olympia title within the next decade. At 18, Mike began to put his plans into motion, entering and winning the 1965 Mr. Lancaster County before enlisting in the Air Force a year later. Mentzer's next competition, the 1971 Mr. America competition, would prove to be a defining moment in Mike's life and would lead him down a path that would see Mike take on the entire fitness industry and develop his high-intensity, heavy-duty workout philosophy. Mike would only place 10th in the competition, but the 19-year-old's potential was noticed by runaway winner Casey Viator, who introduced Mike to Arthur Jones. Jones was an inventor and creator of the Nautilus machines, the same machines we see in every gym today. Adamant that, quote, total exercise cannot be provided by conventional exercise equipment, Arthur began to devise his own exercise system, fixated on the importance of varying resistance through a lift, in much the same way people use chains or resistance bands today. Jones introduced the first of his Nautilus machines to the American public in 1970, claimed that his new machines means that muscles could be worked harder but with less fatigue. This meant that Nautilus workouts, although grueling, would require much less time to complete. His high-intensity training revolution was premised on this idea that you could build muscle and strength in a fraction of the time. Mike described his first call with Jones as like sitting through a lecture. Jones would passionately and objectively break down the science behind physical development, and this would captivate Mentzer, who called this conversation a wake-up call. Jones wrought a fundamental change in how I thought about training, but an even greater influence was the one he had on my thinking processes. While my parents and teachers had paid what amounted to, in retrospect, only superficial lip service to the values of thought, logic and reason, Arthur Jones was absolutely passionate about those values. That impressed me very much. An unfortunate shoulder injury, among other distractions, kept Mike out of competing for a number of years. His obligations with the Air Force also ramped up, and he met his girlfriend of over a decade, Kathy Gelfo. In 1974, Mike left the Air Force and enrolled at the University of Maryland on a 3-year program in which he studied biology, chemistry and mathematics. His goal was to eventually enter medical school and train to be a psychiatrist. He also returned to the gym, and in late 1974 entered the Junior Mr. America competition, where his 190-pound muscular frame and his 5'8" look took first place. He finished third at the 1975 Mr. America show, first in the 1976 competition, and then first at the 1978 Mr. Universe competition. Although the most lucrative route for Mike would have been to follow behind the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu, cozying up to Joe Weider and telling others to work out 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, his strong value system would lead him to challenging and taking on the prevailing wisdom that ruled the fitness industry at the time. The principles he espoused was training 3 times a week and doing only 3 to 5 sets a body part, working out each muscle to absolute failure.
Unlike the hallowed researchers and practitioners of Western theoretical medical science, who rightfully pride themselves on exacting intellectual standards and noble ethical principles, too many of those involved in the sport industry of bodybuilding, and to a significant degree exercise science, have no explicit intellectual standards, and worse, their degree of control has emboldened them such that they actually take pride in violating ethical principles with promiscuous abandon. Unfortunately, too many of the self-styled experts in this field not only fail to make a nominal effort to stay apprised of the latest state-of-the-art knowledge, they actively evade such knowledge and even work diligently to suppress valid ideas that would help people to achieve greater progress, as well as to protect their health. Sheer innocent ignorance is one thing, but the conscious evasion and willful suppression of life-enhancing knowledge is another. The motive of such people is the irrational desire to project and protect an image of incontestable superiority and omniscient infallibility.
Hilariously, in one of his tapes, Mike retold a story where one of his clients asked him what he should do with all the spare time he gained from a shorter workout schedule. Mike would essentially tell him to go touch grass in the most eloquent way.
Mr. Mentzer, what you just said about training so infrequently sounded intelligent and logical, but if I don't train every day, what else am I going to do with my time? I was astonished at such a question, as the individual obviously didn't understand that he was implicitly admitting that his life had been one enormous betrayal. Why, sir, I responded, I might suggest a number of things for your consideration. Read a novel or philosophy book by Ayn Rand. Learn the laws of logic. Translate what you had merely sensed about the nature of existence into an explicitly verbalized philosophy of life. Why, you might even study neuroanatomy and physiology. Yes, neuroanatomy and physiology. I'm always amazed at how much human beings take for granted their sacred existence. Or take up a trade, enroll in a class, go to the movies, take walks in the park. You might even learn about the true nature of romantic love. In short, you might seek to actualize your human stature. He scratched his head and said half-heartedly, Yeah, I suppose I could find something to do.
The way to grow muscle was expertly explained by another student of Arthur Jones, Dorian Yates, on an episode of Joe Rogan. Dorian states, "Imagine running sandpaper over a piece of your skin. This damages your skin in the same way intense exercise stresses the muscle. The damage to your skin caused by the sandpaper causes your body to adapt by growing back thicker skin in the same way stress to the muscle causes it to grow. Crucially and often neglected by fitness gurus is the need for recovery. If you were to keep rubbing the sandpaper over your bloody skin, new cells would never have the chance to develop. In the same way, overtraining stifles muscle growth. Therefore, the need for recovery is a vital aspect of training." In a world where you would follow the industry-approved fitness advice by the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, you'd be working out constantly, likely slowing your own muscle growth, causing yourself to be constantly sore. It's not a huge stretch then to imagine a layperson following this so-called expert advice would wonder why they're constantly sore and not getting bigger. That same person would more than likely end up spending huge sums of their money on supplements, sold by the same industry that gave them this suspect advice in the first place. Now, with that being said, it's easy to see how Mike's dissident advice would result in him being a controversial figure within the fitness industry, next to golden boys such as Columbo and Schwarzenegger. This is also what endeared Mike Mentzer to many to this day, his willingness to follow his principles over what might be more commercially beneficial. Mike viewed the pursuit of physical and intellectual development as not two separate endeavours, but something that should be pursued alongside one another. He envisaged a world quite different from what we have today, where athletes and intellectuals have little in common. Instead, he had hoped true role models could be masters in both aspects of human development.
The reason why the world has descended to the lowest rung of hell in man's history is because, despite the lip service paid them, such life-affirming values no longer predominate. The fact that so many bodybuilders possess a pro-mind, pro-life philosophy, or sense of life, means that there is still hope for man's long-range survival and success. What relevance do these issues have in a tape series about bodybuilding? They are eminently relevant if you are sincerely interested in developing your body, the most vitally important aspect, of course, being the brain. Bear in mind that bodybuilding does not exist in a vacuum apart from the rest of life, and that as a human being, knowledge is your means of achieving your goals. So, of course, the greater your knowledge, the greater your ability to reason, the more likely you'll achieve your goals. Lacking the rudiments of rationality necessary to critically analyze ideas, the average bodybuilder today finds himself impotently bewildered, awash in an oceanic proliferation of new theories on training and nutrition.
Mentzer's main philosophical influences were Aristotle, Nietzsche, and Ayn Rand. The website, which I'll link below, MikeMentzerHeavyDuty.com, discusses in depth how these three philosophers impacted Mike. Aristotle's emphasis on rationality resonated strongly with Mentzer. Aristotle believed that reason was the highest faculty in humans, enabling them to achieve their full potential. Mentzer applied this principle to bodybuilding, promoting a rational and intelligent approach to training and nutrition. He believed in minimizing wasted effort and optimizing results through evidence-based methods.
I realized that if I wanted to be better able to develop my training clients' muscles, I had to further develop my mind. In the process of learning to think logically about bodybuilding, you'll learn something about the nature of thought itself, which can then be extended to other areas of life. And with continued effort and study, you'll soon make the delightful discovery that you've been developing your intellectual range and thereby maturing as a human being should. The practical result is that you become a more efficacious individual with considerable dominion or control over his being. Why not consecrate this moment to that goal of not just actualizing your full muscular potential, but to the constant active expansion of your knowledge to an ever-widening range of achievement, including the reaching of your full human stature, which can be accomplished only by learning how to think properly, logically, not merely about the best manner in which to proceed with your bodybuilding, but about all of the crucial fundamental issues of human existence. It was Aristotle, the discoverer of the laws of logic, the principles of thought, who said that a friend is that other person in whom one sees himself, one's values reflected in the person of another.
Nietzsche's philosophy of individualism resonated with Mentzer's approach to bodybuilding. Nietzsche celebrated the individual's will to power, emphasizing the pursuit of one's own goals and desires. Mentzer aligned with this perspective. championing the idea that bodybuilding should be a personal journey driven through individual aspirations rather than conformity to social standards. Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, centered on the principles of reason, individualism, and self-interest, strongly influenced Mentzer's approach to bodybuilding. Rand believed that individuals should pursue their own self-interest and that reason should guide their actions. Mentzer embraced these ideas, promoting a rational, self-interested approach to bodybuilding that prioritized individual goals and values. The website states that Mentzer's philosophy can be seen as a synthesis of Aristotle's emphasis on rationality, Nietzsche's celebration of individualism, and Rand's objectivist principles. He combined rationality and individualism to create a philosophy that prioritized self-interested goals guided by reason. Mentzer's rational objectivism provided a comprehensive framework for bodybuilding that aimed for optimal results and personal fulfillment. In my own personal opinion, I don't think Rand's philosophy has aged too well into the 21st century. However, it was a popular alternative to postmodernism during the 70s and 80s. It also made sense how Mike would use objectivism to assess a science like bodybuilding. And as I'll discuss later, Mike tragically passed away in 2001 and would have likely further developed his own personal philosophy had he lived longer. So in Mike Mentzer, we get an extremely rare package of someone who was genetically gifted to excel in sport, someone who had the right mentors to nurture his talents as a child, a person with a high IQ willing to develop their mind, educating themselves, and most importantly a man who'd utilise all these tools in conjunction with a strong moral code and value system. And this is what will lead us into the day which arguably destroyed bodybuilding and Mike's dream, forever confining the sport to a niche subgenre, his war with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest. Mentzer's first time competing at the Olympia in '79 will forever be remembered in bodybuilding lore. He achieved the first ever perfect score of 300 from the Olympia judges. Rather bizarrely, he would lose the overall competition to reigning champ Frank Zane, as was common for the competition to award the title to current champions, barring a definitive hole in their physique. After achieving this perfect score, with another year's improvement and an unfortunate injury to Frank Zane, Mentzer was odds on to capture the title in the 1980 Olympia, before he would run into the man who would completely derail his career, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold, who needs no introduction, won the Olympia from 70 to 75. He transcended the sport and became by some distance its biggest ever star. Arnold's influence would revolutionise the fitness industry and play a part in it becoming a billion-dollar industry. Arnold's participation equaled dollar signs and revenue. Arnold retired after the '79 Olympia to focus on his burgeoning acting career, but would still cast a huge shadow over the industry. The bodybuilding scene in the 70s was ruled over by Frank Zane, Franco Columbu, and of course Arnold Schwarzenegger. A new group of young bodybuilders were set to take over the competitive scene in the 80s. Mentzer, Tom Platz, Chris Dickerson and Boyer Coe. The 1980 Olympia was set to be one of the most stacked lineups in history, with reigning champ Frank Zane, favourite Mike Mentzer, Chris Dickerson, Boyer Coe and a young Tom Platz. After the success of Pumping Iron, the 1980 Olympia was supposed to be another step forward for the sport to emerge from a niche sport into the mainstream, taking place in front of a packed Australian crowd and being televised for the first time by CBS. The bodybuilding world, the Aussie crowd, and all the competitors would soon be shocked when Arnold Schwarzenegger announced he would come out of retirement on short notice the day before the competition. Many of the competitors were confused by the announcement. Zane and Co expressed pity for Arnold that him coming back in such mediocre shape would tarnish his legacy. However, in the background, only one man understood the insidious implications of the move, Mike Mentzer. Upon this revelation, it was reported that Mike was incensed, suspecting that this was a move by the industry to install their golden boy as champion yet again. Arnold would immediately go about belittling and insulting the other contestants in an effort to unnerve them before the competition began. Mike would directly confront Arnold after Arnold stated, "We all know Zane beat you last year because you've a big stomach." An incensed Mentzer then leaped up 20 feet away, rebuking Arnold Schwarzenegger and walking menacingly towards him. Arnold didn't exactly match Mike's energy, deciding to stay seated while Mentzer, standing up for himself and his friends, towered over the Austrian.
The morning of the show, the atmosphere was much different. There was a tension there. There was a hostility and negativity that skewed everyone's normal perception and, of course, prevented anyone from deriving the pleasure they might have had otherwise. Everything was askew at this point. It was not a normal contest. No one was talking or acting as the way they usually do. There was a strain and tension in the air all the way through. Then the issue of the weight classes came up, and there was a lot of arguing going on between Arnold and a few of the guys. I wasn't even concerned about that. I didn't care one way or the other. I thought I could win. It was a very large room. There must have been maybe 50 or 60 people in there, and Arnold, as usual, wanted to be the center of attention. So he had said something to denigrate Amir Badu in front of everyone, something that was uncalled for. He was making a fool out of himself, but at that time I wasn't concerned. I thought if Amir Badu wanted to defend himself, that was his business. So he was going through his antics. At one point, Boyer Co. stood up as a gentleman and said, look, why don't we just let Arnold explain to all of us right here, right now, what his reasons are for wanting to have two weight classes. Maybe we can get to the bottom of this instead of arguing aimlessly. And he did say it in a very gentlemanly fashion. There was no hint of malice or anything negative in his voice. And Arnold snapped back, oh Boyer, why don't you stop acting like a baby? Grow up and be a man. Which I thought was uncalled for. So I said, look, Boyer Co. said that as a gentleman, something to that effect. He doesn't deserve that. And that pissed him off. He turned around very rapidly to face me, and he literally had his upper lip was furled around, he was snarling like an animal. He said, oh, come on, Mentzer, we all know that you lost last year because of your big belly. And I allowed that to irritate me perhaps too much, and on impulse, I ran over towards him. I was surprised. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat down. I scared him. He went over and sat in the corner, and when he went to sit down, I continued at him. I was wagging my finger at him, telling him that his behavior was reprehensible, that it was not Boyer Co. who needed to grow up, but him. And he could look me in the eye. He literally went from being a frantic, hysterical adolescent to shrinking away like an injured child. And that's really gives you some indication, some clues to his character. Only once I stood up at a pre-judging meeting did that thing come to at least a partial halt. That irritated Ben Weider, and he stood in between Arnold and I and tried to assert himself. I just remember thinking how out of control he was. And equally as interesting was how out of control Ben Weider and the hierarchy of the IFBB were. I thought these were supposed to be the guys that ran the show. But here you had this big Prussian son of a bitch standing up acting like a Nazi. And Ben Weider, who had previously always seemed to pride himself on being in control of things. After all, he never lets us forget he's the president of the IFBB. All of a sudden, he was letting this Nazi walk all over him. He sat there quietly. I realized then that Arnold was the IFBB to a very significant degree.
This encounter had the effect of raising already high tensions and placing Schwarzenegger at the centre of the drama that would soon unfold on stage at the Sydney Opera House. Arguably, it also made the competitors less aware of another issue that would loom much larger in the actual contest. As the competition began, the Aussie crowd began cheering Arnold, happy to see a legend return. However, this positive attitude towards Schwarzenegger would quickly change as the events of the competition unfolded. Arnold looks far smaller and less conditioned than his previous years and would blatantly cheat in the competition to hide his weak points, flashing a bicep pose even though the judges called upon the competitors to perform a tricep pose. Shockingly, not one of the judges nor organisers would sanction Arnold for this, nor even bring it up. Now it was not just Mentzer who was unnerved by Arnold's presence, as other competitors could see the obvious double standard that was unfolding before their eyes. The spirited Australian crowd would completely flip on Schwarzenegger and begin to boo upon the shocking announcement that Arnold had won the competition, beating Mentzer, Tom Platz, Coe, Dickerson and Frank Zane. The judges who scored Arnold the winner were as follows: Mitz Kawashima, Albert Busick, Reg Park and Brendan Ryan, who made up 4 of the 7 judges that year. I will now discuss the immediate reaction to the announcement that Schwarzenegger was the winner by the contestants and an in-depth look at Arnold's personal relationship with the judges of the 1980 Olympia. I'll be reading passages from a fantastic article which I'll link below, written by John Fair in 1980 for Iron Game History. Arnold was booed by approximately 40% of more than 2,000 fans who filled the posh seats of the Opera House. According to Jeff Thompson, a bodybuilding aficionado from South Australia, it was a full house and loud booing resounded through the whole structure. The booing was quite intense. It eventually subsided to some applause. Boyer Co. recalls that as soon as the booing continued, people down in front started peeling off the armrests of their seats and throwing them onto stage. Zane was so angry that he broke his trophy to bits. while Coe and Mentzer left theirs behind and vowed never to return to Australia. Is there no justice? The enraged Coe demanded to know. But he had a premonition of foul play. When they announced Mike 5th, he recalls, I knew for sure that Arnold won. A fair placing for Arnold in that competition would have been 8th or 9th. The impact on Mentzer was far more devastating. Quotes, when I was called 5th, he said, I was totally shocked. It was just a ridiculous placing, made more ridiculous by an out-of-shape Arnold winning. He not only retired from competitive bodybuilding, but Mike would pursue a self-destructive course that culminated in his early death in 2001. Arguably the most devastating result was the decision by CBS, in light of the controversy, not to broadcast the 1980 event. About 2 weeks prior to the contest, it sent a film crew to California under producer Sherman Egan to gather human interest material on 4 of the leading contenders, Mentzer, Coe, Zane, and Dennis Tenorino. A day or two after the contest, Egan called these 4 men, and he made it clear that in his limited bodybuilding knowledge, it was clear even to him that the contest was fixed, and they could never show this on CBS, and CBS would not even bother to edit it. After the 4 men would eventually watch the footage, they remarked that it was even worse than they suspected, and understood why CBS would not air same. I'll now discuss the relationship Arnold had with the 4 judges who named him as winner of the competition, once again with passages taken from John Fair's article. The passage reads, it is hardly surprising that Albert Busick, as one of his oldest and dearest friends, should be predisposed to favour Arnold. Biographer Lawrence Leamer calls him one of 2 central people in Arnold's life. After seeing Schwarzenegger win the Junior Mr. Europe contest in '65, Busick, who managed a gym in Munich, facilitated Arnold's move to Germany from Austria, where he became an instructor under Busick. Quote, I was interested in Arnold as a great athlete to bring him to Munich, Busick recalled. A year later, he enabled Schwarzenegger to enter the '66 Mr. Universe competition in London. If it hadn't been for Albert, I wouldn't have been able to compete, Arnold recalls. Bill Pearl refers to Busick as a very good friend of Arnold, who still idolizes him on the level of a sycophant. Boyer Coe recalls encountering Busick in the lobby of the hotel where they're staying the day after the Olympia at Sydney. Quote, he told me that he would have voted for me first, but he had to vote for Arnold out of friendship. Brendan Ryan was regarded as somewhat of a mysterious figure, an Australian who was not well known in America or the international bodybuilding community. According to Coe, who otherwise knew nothing about him, Ryan managed a gym operated by Olympia director Paul Graham, and because of that connection, Boyer was sure he did what he was told to do. Another insight into Ryan's ties to Arnold comes from the testimony of Arnold's former girlfriend, Barbara Outland Baker, with whom he lived for nearly 6 years during the 70s. In her autobiography, Arnold and Me, she vividly describes her encounter with Ryan and his wife Audra, who were among the 300 close friends of the family invited to the inaugural luncheon for Governor Schwarzenegger in 2003. At the inaugural ceremony on the following day, the Ryans and the Bakers were included amongst those escorted on the red carpet, but included the likes of Robert Lowe, Danny DeVito, Jamie Lee Curtis and Dennis Miller. Also seated at their luncheon table and sharing in the later festivities with Baker, her husband John and the Ryans was Mitz Kawashima, yet another judge from the 1980 Olympia with close connections to Schwarzenegger. According to Baker, Mitz regarded Arnold as his firstborn adopted son. A once 21-year-old man he had watched grow into one of the most powerful men in the world. So Bill Pearl notes that Mitz and Arnold were linked as business partners and had co-sponsored a contest in Hawaii. Coe remembers Kawashima as a beautiful old man and thinks he just got caught up in the emotion of the moment and voted for Arnold, but later regretted it. Kawashima, along with Busick, also served as usher for Schwarzenegger's wedding in 1986, only 6 years after the 80 Olympia. Although Mitz knew of other bodybuilders at the Olympia, his relationship with Arnold was special. Most accounts of Arnold's early days in America dwelled on the importance of Reg Park as a role model for his early development. Arnold admits that after watching him in the film role of Hercules, he became obsessed with Park. He was the image in front of me from the time I started training. I'd fixed the idea of building a body like Park's. The model was there in my mind. I only had to grow enough to fill it. Later, after winning the NABA Mr. Universe competition in 1967, Arnold accepted Park's invitation to visit his home in Johannesburg, South Africa. A decade later, Schwarzenegger was able to return the hospitality when Park's teenage son, John, spent a year and a half at Long Beach. Arnold looked after him, John recalls. Quote, I spent a great deal of time with him on weekends. He'd sometimes drive down and take me for dinners, pick me up, bring me back to LA. You know, he treated me kind of like a kid brother. These were meaningful personal relationships that would go far to compromise any objectivity Park might have had towards Arnold's physique in the competitive setting. Boyer Coe stated, Reg was in Arnold's camp 100%, even giving Arnold instructions from the judges' table. As previously stated, the above analysis of Arnold's relationship with the Olympia judges comes from a masterfully written article by John Fair, which I will link below and recommend to check out reading if you want more information about the competition. It's hard to state just how damaging this competition was for the sport of bodybuilding. The Mr. Olympia competition was never again televised, costing the sport a huge opportunity to break out into the mainstream. It forever tainted the legacy and character of the sport's biggest star. It cost fan favourites Mike Mentzer and Tom Platz one of their best chances to win the coveted title, and worst of all, it would mark the start of a tragic turn in Mike Mentzer's life.
But Mike was the next Mr. Olympia. Mike was the golden child. Mike was senior editor in Muscle and Fitness magazine. He was an intellectual guy, the intellectual bodybuilder, the very smart bodybuilder. I'm like, wow, how great is this? He got upset and carried this bitterness and carried this anger with him everywhere he went. Carried the hatred of losing the 81 Mr. Olympia, or 80 Mr. Olympia on his back. And I think that's one of the reasons it caused him to die.
In the immediate aftermath, many bodybuilders would boycott the following Olympia and many smaller shows, while Mike would retire from the sport altogether, being disillusioned by the sheer corruption of the sport which he dedicated his life to. In Mike Mentzer, The Untold Story, writer Peter McGough writes that in the wake of his 5th place at the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest, Mike Mentzer's career began to fragment. In his seminars, he was openly contemptuous of the Sydney affair, a posture he believes led to being unfortunately blacklisted by the IFBB, making promoters reluctant to book him. He left Weider Publications, and by 1982, his annual income had gone from $200,000 a year to zero. There is a fascinating and yet unfortunate phenomenon where people with high intelligence are more predisposed to mental health disorders such as depression. The great Friedrich Nietzsche's final days are an example of this. One large study, linked below, led by Ruth Karpinski of Pitzer College, surveyed more than 3,700 members of Mentzer, a society whose members must have an IQ in the top 2%, which is typically about 132 or higher. The team asked about many factors including mental health. They discovered that mood disorders and anxiety disorders were extremely common amongst Mentzer members. Amongst the general population, about 10% of people have mood disorders and about 10% have anxiety disorders, with some degree of overlap between the two. Amongst Mentzer members, those percentages were much higher. About 20% reported having been diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and nearly 27% having been diagnosed with a mood disorder such as depression or bipolar disorder. One can imagine a man like Mike Mentzer, an extremely intelligent, principled person who had undoubtedly abused his body with amphetamines and performance-enhancing drugs, experiencing an existential betrayal like the 1980 Mr. Olympia, would find himself shrouded in a cloud of darkness. By 1985, Mike's life was hit with a number of serious setbacks. A number of business relationships and projects had been severed, such as his work with Arthur Jones, and the end of Workout magazine, which Mike described as a crushing blow. Worst of all, Mike's father, who he truly idolised, had passed away, and he and his girlfriend Kathy Gelfo ended their decade-long relationship. Mike began using amphetamines, which he stated led to him performing irrational acts, which took a serious toll on his mental health.
Not to talk about negative things. Remember one day I was walking to Gold's Gym. Mike's in the gutter, laying there like a drunken guy. I'm like, oh my God, Mike. He didn't hear me. Then he walked in when we were training and warming up, taking his pictures off the walls. I said to my training partner, Tony, if I ever get like that, keep the pictures, stay on the wall, okay? Don't let me... I was sort of making a joke, but I felt so sad for Mike. I was worried about him. Like, wow, Mike, he was the guy that, he's the intellectual, the guy that was the scientist. He had a great mind. I'm like, what a great bodybuilder. That's the way we should be, The epitome of what a bodybuilder is all about.
Sadly, over the next decade, Mike would be hospitalised. He was arrested by the police and institutionalised several times. He was finally able to get off amphetamines and indeed start a very successful personal training and consulting business. Despite recovering from his mental health crisis, more setbacks would hit the Mentzer family. While in hospital, it was discovered that he had clots in his leg, leading Mike to having 2 silent heart attacks. Meanwhile, his brother Ray was on dialysis and required a kidney transplant, which of course Mike did not hesitate to offer his own, although his own health issues precluded him from this kindness. Mike would move in with Ray so he could better look after his brother, and the brothers lived together for a few years, until on June 10, 2001, Ray discovered Mike dead in bed. apparently of a heart attack. On June 12th, Joanne Sharkey, general manager of Mike's business, who was in essence like an older protective sister to the brother, received a call from Ray's dialysis unit that he hadn't turned up for his appointment. Almost unbelievably, on going to the apartment, Joanne found Ray had passed away. It's likely that the revelation of his beloved brother's death was the last straw for Ray, who was already in dire health, and so the two Mentzer brothers would pass away 2 days apart, aged 49 and 47 respectively. Mike Mentzer and Arnold Schwarzenegger have two very different legacies. Arnold is of course a household name and is an insanely accomplished man, but he's also the epitome of the great saying by Carl Jung that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Arnold had a success at all cost mindset, where he'd happily bully his rivals in the bodybuilding scene, throwing his weight around and using his name to get what he wanted. Even in his political career you can see this. Arnold built his career as a Republican, but now he's cozied up to the more liberal side of the political aisle, likely in an attempt to soften his reputation with mainstream media in his final years, likely putting success and reputation above his own principles. While Mike never achieved his dreams, finishing his education nor winning the Olympia, he's cultivated a much more unique legacy which has endured and even flourished in the last few years. His heavy-duty style of training, with a strong emphasis on recovery, has become common practice for many lifters, with the likes of Dorian Yates, a 6-time Olympia champion, constantly citing Mike as an inspiration. Mike Mentzer is remembered as a trailblazer, a rebel and a man of principle. And while Arnold had all the material success, from my research on Mike, I think he would have been much more proud of the legacy he left and the impact his teaching will forever have on the fitness industry.